Eagle Houston, you're looking good.
After 21 hours and 36 minutes on the surface of the moon, it was time for the first people to walk here, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to start heading home.
8, 7, 6, 5, port stage, engine arm ascent, proceed.
In this video, we will look at what the astronauts left behind on what is one of the most significant historical sites that no one has visited since. Picture this. As the spacecraft roared off the lunar surface, Buzz Aldrin peered out of his window and witnessed an extraordinary sight. The engine's forceful exhaust kicked up moon dust, causing the American flag to topple and touch the lunar ground. To combat the moon's stillness, engineers had devised a clever solution, a special mounting mechanism with a horizontal crossbar to keep the flag proudly upright. Surprisingly, this flag, crafted from nylon, wasn't a custom-made piece. It was simply ordered from a standard government supply catalog. In addition to the flag, other commemorative items that serve no scientific purpose were left on the moon. Attached on the ladder of the descent stage, there is a metal plaque featuring the signatures of the Apollo 11 crew and then US President Richard Nixon. The astronauts also placed a number of small objects with symbolic meaning on the surface. These items were stored in a shoulder pocket on Buzz Aldrin's spacesuit, and he almost forgot to leave them on the moon and was reminded to do so by Armstrong while he was already on the ladder to re-enter the lunar module. From there, Aldrin dropped the objects onto the lunar surface. Part of it was an Apollo 1 mission patch to honor the astronauts that had died in a tragic accident 2.5 years prior. Their cabin had caught fire during a launch rehearsal, killing all 3 crew members. The astronauts also left 2 commemorative medals to honor the Soviet cosmonauts Yuri Gagarin and Vladimir Komarov, 2 space pioneers that died in different tragic accidents. Even amidst the Cold War, the aim was to express mutual respect for those who risked their lives for the exploration of space. Another object that was placed to express the spirit of international cooperation is a small silicone disc. It contains goodwill messages from the leaders of 73 countries around the world. In addition, it features the names of Congress members responsible for NASA legislation, as well as names of NASA senior staff. The astronauts also left a gold olive branch as a symbol of global peace. Besides these purely symbolic objects, we can find instruments that we used for experiments, such as this seismometer that can measure ground vibrations. The device, powered by solar panels, records data on the strength, duration, and approximate direction of seismic events and transmits this data to Earth. Unfortunately, just 3 weeks after the moon landing, the device stopped sending data back, presumably because it overheated in the midday sun. The temperature fluctuations between day and night are much more extreme than on Earth. This is because the sun's heat is not absorbed by an atmosphere, which could distribute it and retain it during the night. If we look further, we find another experiment, the lunar laser retro reflector. It acts as a special kind of mirror reflecting incoming light in exactly the same direction from which the beam originates. This means scientists on Earth can direct a laser beam towards this device, which will reflect the light back to Earth. Since the speed of light is known, this instrument can be used to measure the exact distance between the Earth and the Moon, and it is the mission's only experiment that still works to this day. Other experiments that the astronauts carried out can only be recognized by the traces they left behind. The astronauts took rock samples and drilled into the ground, measuring the resistance. They also hung up a special sheet for the duration of their stay in order to measure the solar wind outside of Earth's magnetosphere. Because the astronauts had to bring this sail back to Earth, only the pole remained on the moon. Close to the lander, we find an area that is cluttered with objects. This is the trash we left behind. A number of rock samples were brought back to Earth, and in order to be able to take as much as possible of those, the astronauts tossed away equipment that had already served its purpose. Also, the black and white camera, which had transmitted both the first steps on the moon and the raising of the flag to a worldwide audience, stayed behind on the moon. Armstrong's Hasselblad camera was thought to be lost or left on the moon surface. In addition to commemorative items, scientific experiments, and tossed away equipment, the astronauts left one other thing behind: their footprints, which are often used as a metaphor for the achievement that this journey represents. The paths that the astronauts took are clearly visible in the moon dust, and they reveal one path that was taken far away from the landing site. Towards the end of the extravehicular activity, Neil Armstrong took the chance and went on an unplanned trip to the Little West Crater. After the astronauts left, the site's condition is expected to only change slowly, not so much in periods of weeks or months, but decades, centuries, and even greater intervals. And so today, more than 53 years after Apollo 11 left, it can be assumed that solar radiation has visually changed the site. Without a significant atmosphere to protect the moon, the intense ultraviolet radiation of sunlight will have an impact on the materials used in the mission. It is widely assumed that the colors of the US flag have faded over the years. In addition, the materials were exposed to the extreme temperature fluctuations, alternating between 14 days of 100 degrees Celsius heat and then 14 days in the dark at negative 150 degrees Celsius. And so it's likely that the nylon flag is also tattered and disintegrated, as other materials will have suffered and will be covered in dust. Ultimately, however, these are assumptions to the best of our knowledge. What's left is a truly fascinating historical site that, unlike archaeological sites on Earth, is superbly preserved, but yet hardly studyable. Well, you might have been wondering, then why haven't we been back to the moon? For the past 5 decades, no one has visited the moon, not a record of any human steps. December 14, 1972 was the last time humans walked its surface during NASA's Apollo 17 mission. So why did we stop going to the moon? Well, from the first moon landing in 1969 to the last one in 1972, only 12 people have walked on the moon. The astronauts and even one geologist studied its surface, planted measuring equipment, brought back moon rocks, and stuck a flag in the ground. While that may not sound like much, originally the space program was an enormous deal. The build-up to Apollo was against the backdrop of the highly charged Cold War, the most visible marker of which was the space race with the Soviet Union. But while the landing changed the world forever, enthusiasm for the space program almost immediately collapsed, with the goal having been completed. Many in the US believed that the relatively symbolic mission was unreasonably expensive. NASA's budget, at its peak in 1966, covered nearly 4.5% of the US's total federal budget, or more than $40 billion in today's terms. In fact, although there had been 3 more Apollo missions planned, they were scrapped in favor of launching Skylab, NASA's first space station. In the years to follow, the benefit of space stations and the huge amount of cooperation between countries in trying to establish the International Space Station by the late 90s effectively eliminated interest in actually having people on the moon. In fact, since 1972, no human has even left low Earth orbit, much less reached the moon. Plus, by 1973, the Saturn V rocket, which was the only one able to produce enough power to make the trip to another celestial body, was retired. But in the mid-2000s, the idea of going back to the moon was reintroduced with the NASA Authorization Act of 2005. This resulted in the highly anticipated Constellation program and the creation of new rockets that would rival the Saturn V. Sadly, just 3 years after Constellation was started, the global economic crisis hit. By 2010, the Obama administration announced that the program was over budget, behind schedule, and lacking in innovation, and Constellation was officially defunded, along with a large portion of NASA. While the organization once comprised nearly 4.5% of the federal budget, by 2011, they were only allocated less than half of 1%. In 2013, NASA's chief administrator stated that they would not put humans on the moon in his lifetime, although NASA does expect to send people into Mars orbit by the 2030s, but that doesn't rule out the idea completely. Although NASA is unwilling to invest in another trip, Russia, China, Japan, and the European Space Agency have all aimed to send their own astronauts to the moon, with the ESA hoping to establish a moon base within 25 years. So while it likely won't be Americans, the moon may just see a human presence in the relatively near future. Well, I'm sure you are going to love to watch our video about space missions that flew under radar on our channel. Make sure to subscribe to us and never miss our amazing videos like this. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Till then, stay tuned.